In John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, these were his opening lines. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal task brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. What a beautiful summary of the story of the Bible. The Bible is about the fall and sin and the entrance of woe into this world, and about God's work to make right all that was wronged, to fix, to renew, to, as John Milton put it, restore the blissful seat through that one man, Jesus Christ. If you're looking at the Bible as a book that's going to tell you about all of the other civilizations and nations of the past, that's not what the Bible is about. The Bible is about God's work to redeem man. And because it comes through Jesus Christ, and Jesus comes through the nation of Israel, Act 3, the story of Israel, is a big part of that story. It begins in Genesis chapter 12 with a man named Abraham. It is to Abraham that God said, I will make of you a great nation. And so when you open the Bible and you read Genesis 1 through Genesis 11, those first 11 chapters are a fast forwarding through 2,000 years of history to get to Abraham and the story of Israel. In those 11 chapters, what we see are 3 judgment scenes. There's the scene of the story of the fall, then there's the story of the flood, and then there's the story of the tower. Now, we've already talked about the story of the fall, man's sin, death, and woe coming into the world. And if you thought things were going to get better, they don't. As we mentioned at the end of our last lesson, things are going to get worse before they get better. Things go from bad to worse. Because when you turn the next page, you read of Cain killing Abel. There's an interesting thing that God says to Cain in Genesis 4 and verse 7. He says, Cain, sin lies at the door. It's personified as a crouching criminal, a murderer. Some translations even say sin is crouched behind the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. God knows that we're going to wrestle and struggle with sin, but man should rule over it. Unfortunately, that's not what we see in these first 11 chapters. Because in Genesis 6, verses 5 and 6, God looks down at his creation, and what he sees is that the thoughts and intents of man's heart are on evil continually, so that God was even sorry that he made man. The text says God was grieved to his heart. And so in Genesis 7 and verse 23, God makes it known his will to blot out all man, all creeping animals on the face of the earth, and the birds of the air. And for 40 days and 40 nights, God rained judgment upon this earth. 1 Peter 3 and verse 21 tells us that only 8 souls were saved in that ark through those floodwaters. It was Noah that found grace in the eyes of the Lord. His 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Those 4 men and their wives make 8. But to the rest of the world, that rain and that water did not bring salvation. It brought judgment. In our third and final judgment scene, the story of the tower, we find that even after God starts fresh, things still don't go right. Man still fails to submit himself to the will of God. In Genesis 11, verses 3 and 4, man says, I'm going to build a tower to the heavens for 2 reasons. I want to make a name for myself, and number 2, I don't want to be dispersed on the earth. Now, we don't have a codified law from God to man at this point, but we do know this. God has made it known in Genesis 1:28 that his will for man is that he be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And lest we think that command was only for Adam and Eve, it's repeated to Noah and his family in Genesis 9 and verse 1. And again in Genesis 9 and verse 7. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But man says, no, I'm staying put. And I'm going to make a name for myself right here. And so God confuses the languages of man at the tower. That's why it becomes known as the Tower of Babel. What a great contrast we see between Genesis 11 and Genesis 12, where man says, I'm going to make a name for myself. But in Genesis 12, God goes to Abraham and says, I will make your name great. Noted scholar N.T. Wright has correctly pointed out that the story of the fall is an example of man's rebellion. The story of the flood is an example of man's wickedness. And the story of the Tower of Babel, is an example of man's arrogance. I will make a name for myself. And so when we open Genesis chapter 12, it is a breath of fresh air. Because for 11 chapters, we've been moving in the wrong direction. This is a major turning point in the story of the Bible. And so we're now in Act 3, the story of Israel. We'll talk more about turning points next time.